It's now 2:11, a Friday morning. It's kind of sunny out there, but don't know that it's overly warm. But there you go. Lockdown is on its way out. On the end of the phone is somebody who's, I think been in at the deep end of all of this right the way through. MP for Lewis, Maria Caulfield. Morning, Maria. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, how are you?
Getting there, I think. I'm still here, like you. Have been here sort of every day, pretty much. Are you still doing your shifts at nursing?
Yeah, so I do some weekends and nights. It's definitely getting quieter in the hospitals, and we're kind of waiting for the kind of okay to get back to doing kind of elective care. So I work at a cancer hospital, and while there's chemo happening, surgery isn't really happening yet. So we're kind of in that in-between stage where the COVID patients have gone right down, thankfully, but not quite enough yet to fully reopen services. So we're almost there. Yeah,
of course, other things are easing back as well. And if you were in the United States at the moment, you'd wonder whether there was anything actually going on in terms of COVID-19, because social distancing, certainly there and in lots of places here with some of the things going on in London, seems to have disappeared, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Westminster this week when we had the Black Lives Matter protest, and my concern is that people are very freely able to protest. There's not a problem with that, but it's just that they're not social distancing, and particularly for the black and ethnic minority groups who seem to be more at risk of either catching the virus or being considerably unwell with the virus. I'm particularly concerned on those protests that that social distancing isn't being maintained, and I think particularly there weren't many people even wearing masks there. So, I do have some concerns, not with the protests themselves, but just making sure that people are keeping themselves safe.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing there is a fairly contentious thing. So we'll move away from Black Lives Matters, because there's a much bigger forum going on with that. I'd like to really turn attention to some of the things that have been going on here and affect local people. One of them, which is BML2. Now, I was talking to Brian Hart earlier this week, and he says we're about to hit the next phase of BML2. Would that be correct?
Yeah, so the government announced, and it's often missed with all the coronavirus stuff happening, the government announced that some of the schemes, such as BML2, so the Lewis to Uckfield line, as people often call it, submitted a bid for government funding to reopen some of those closed rail lines. And we got notified last week that we have made it through to the second round. And we have a meeting scheduled next week with DfT officials to look at how we can work the scheme up to a place where the government feel comfortable funding it. So, this is the kind of the closest we've got to getting the money for decades, really. So, there's a couple of more rounds we've got to get through to secure the money, but we've made it so far, and hopefully our meeting with the DfT officials, it will be a virtual meeting, will go well next week.
Yeah, I'm a little confused, as I'm probably sure some other people are, because I distinctly remember having conversations with various people about the BML2 and the project, saying that it was already funded, but it wasn't from the government. It was private. It could be privately funded. What's happened there?
So, that is the kind of backup plan. So there is a private consortium who are interested in investing in the scheme, and were busy behind the scenes working up a business case for that. But ideally, if the government were happy to fund it, we would get it done much more quicker, because obviously Network Rail would then be part of the process of actually re-establishing the line. So the advantages of having the government running the scheme are twofold. Firstly, that it will provide the money, but secondly, it will get into the programme of works much more quickly and much more easily. So that's not to say we don't, if we don't get government funding, we won't look at the private investment model, but this would be a quicker and better way forward.
Yeah, now I know, again, in previous times we've spoken about some of this, and the pinch point at East Croydon has been one of the delaying factors, and this whole BML2 scheme has been running for 50 years or so. People have been trying to reopen this train line. What's the timescale you're looking at now when you said you're up to phase 2? Because it sounds like a bit of a game show entry.
Yeah, so Grant Shapps, when he launched this Restoring Your Railways scheme, made clear that he was really interested in schemes that could be up and running pretty quickly, and by 2024 certainly have spades in the ground. And because a lot of the line is the track bed is already there, the Lewis to Uckfield line is a pretty quick and easy scheme to get up and running. And the Croydon issue is being addressed by the government anyway, so there's a big major infrastructure rail project happening around the Croydon pinch point, and so having that opening up would really make a massive difference to the scheme. So this was something we would have had to do with the scheme, but the government is doing that part of it anyway. So this could happen pretty quickly. So by 2024. Spades in the ground trying to reopen that line. So, and that's why the government are so interested in it, because they want quick and easy schemes that they can get up and running. Yeah,
so if you're looking at spades in the ground by 2024, if you get through the various processes, we're looking at trains running by when? 2030 or before?
If you talk to Brian, he says, that really within, a couple of years, that the scheme could be up and running, because it is just a case of opening up the track bed again, and obviously we've got the Brighton mainline and we've got the Uckfield line. It's only a short track that needs reinstating. So, and unlike some closed rail lines, it hasn't been built on. It's pretty easy to do. There's the argument about electrifying the Uckfield line, which may or may not need to happen depending on who you speak to with current technology. But yeah, it's a pretty short track, so it'd be pretty quick to do. And Brian Hart and the BML2 team, are putting that case to government. That
he was talking about also going under the Downs into Brighton. I mean, is that part of this scheme?
Yeah, so there would be a tunnelling aspect to it, but with technology today, that's not that big an issue. It's not as expensive as it was, 10 years ago when, we were trying to put bids into government then. So the tunnelling issue has significantly reduced in cost due to technology, and again would not be, a game changer in terms of the scheme itself. And the advantage of that, because that was always the argument against this scheme, was that the trains going into Brighton, would have to come back out in a certain way. The advantage of if you do the tunnelling is you put places like Seaford and Newhaven onto the main line, and currently they're kind of poor relations on a small branch line, having to either change at Brighton or Lewis. For the tourist economy, being able to directly get to Newhaven, to the ferry, to Seaford for the beach, would be a game changer for both those towns as well.
I mean, there are sort of locally some objectors to it, not quite liking the idea of taking away the quiet life in these villages that trains would remove. But I'm guessing that sort of protests are really for dealing with a bit later on. So if I can turn my attention really now to the other conversation that I had this week. I've had two conversations about the fire services in East Sussex and the proposed cuts. On Monday, I spoke with Councillor Roy Galley, who is from Wilton District Council, and he was talking about this being a consultation with these cuts, but he also used some fairly strong language in calling the Fire Service Union liars for what they'd actually claimed was a proposal to cut 10 fire engines from the area. What's your thought on all of this?
So, I've spoken to the Chief Fire Officer over this. So this is a proposal from the Fire Authority, so the local East Sussex Fire Authority, to change the way that they manage their fire service across the county. Now, there may be some truth in the fact that the Fire Brigade Union are kind of overemphasising some of the changes, because there won't be an overall reduction, but there will be some changes in certain places. But I do have concerns about this plan. And talking to the Chief Fire Officer, this apparently isn't about funding, because I would be the first person to knock on Rishi Sunak's door asking for money for fire service. But apparently this is about changing the way the fire service operates in the county, and there needs to be a movement of some of those fire engines to better respond to calls. But I do have concerns I don't think this is the right time to be doing that consultation in the middle of a global pandemic. And when, we are, the fire service is already, overstretched at the moment. I do have, places like Newhaven, Seaford will be losing engines. Lewistown will be losing an engine. And I do have concerns because they're not the easiest places to get to. We know what the A27 is like. You need your local fire service. So I've done a joint letter with the Labour MP, Lloyd Russell Moyle in Brighton, asking the fire authority to postpone this consultation and to relook at things because I don't think, while the consultation started, it doesn't finish till, another couple of months, and they say that the decisions won't be made till after the summer. But I don't think people realise what's being proposed on the table. So I've asked the fire authority to stop and look again and take the genuine concerns that people have about the reduction in fire engines in their local towns and villages.
Yeah, I mean, you've actually come out pretty much word for word what Uckfield Town Council have said. They're demanding that any public consultation be suspended until it can be given proper consideration post COVID-19. My concern here was, as I say, when I spoke with the councillor on Monday about this subject, he was actually quite adamant that the fire service unions were lying. I'm just worried that the language used was rather strong. The accusation was rather strong without me actually having said that that's where the information had come from, because it hadn't come from there. It had actually come from a news website. And all it's doing is, inflaming things to the point where both sides get rather more entrenched than they actually need to be. I think that's why myself and Lloyd are calling for kind of a halt to the consultation at the moment, because I think it's important for the public to really hear both sides of the argument and to be able to make up their own mind. And, if you look at the consultation, it's, for my mind, it's asking people, are you in favour of this or that? It doesn't really go through kind of what the options are. It's either yes or no. So I'm not that impressed by the consultation itself. It's quite leading in some of its questions. So myself, cross-party, we're working on this together because we just feel if it's a government funding issue, we will go and lobby for that money. But we're told it isn't a funding issue. It's about how the fire service operates overall in terms of changing demands, because there's less fires, more road traffic accidents, and that sort of thing. I'll put to you the same question then. I'll put to you the same question I put to the councillor on Monday, actually, about this, because 2 or 3 years ago, I remember speaking to Giles York, the Chief Constable of Sussex. I think he retired yesterday. He was the Chief Constable of Sussex at the time, and talking about cuts to the police service. And he was using a pretty similar argument that the reduction in crime and the crime had moved in a different direction that didn't warrant the police on the streets. And they've since had to go back and readdress that and actually pay much more attention to what's going on the streets, regardless of the crime figures, because people's fears and petty crime had started to increase. The same thing here really goes with what is being planned for the fire service, because a lot of the fire service's work has been in prevention. And a lot of the work sees a lot of these officers going out preventing. Now, if you haven't got the officers there, you can't do that. That in itself is surely going to lead to an increase in fires again. So, I mean, it's really following a very, ill-proven example, isn't it?
Well, I'd agree with you. I spoke out very clearly when a few years ago the police wanted to change the model and move away from neighbourhood policing, and thankfully that's being changed now. And I think we're all seeing that, Ringmer, for example, has got a new PCSO and who's holding virtual surgeries at the moment.
Yeah, I'd seen that.
That local intelligence, you just can't, buy that, because that helps prevent crimes. It helps, tackle crimes. And I think if you were talking to individual police officers, they were very concerned about those changes as well for those reasons. And that's why it's important to listen to fire officers now, who are saying, if you change this model the way it works, we can't operate effectively. And the proposals aren't reducing the number of fire officers. They are reducing the number of fire engines. But I always believe as a nurse that if you want to hear how the service should go, you should listen to people at the grassroots. I think fire officers have concerns. It's not for me to say that they're right or wrong. I think we genuinely need to take our time before changing a model that maybe in 5-10 years' time we come to regret the decisions that were made now. So that's why myself and Lloyd are saying, let's look at this properly. Let's not rush into any decisions.
Okay. Do we know what is actually going to happen for now?
So at the moment, the consultation is ongoing. The fire authority, which is made up of local councillors, Roy Galley's obviously said, he's supportive of it, but the local Lib Dems are supportive of it and have criticised myself and Lloyd for coming out and saying we should halt the process. So I would urge people to lobby your councillors who are on that fire authority and share your concerns as well as doing the consultation, because it's only by that way that we can, make sure that we make the right decision about our local fire service. Yeah,
the other thing that concerns me goes back to partly the cost of COVID-19, because I think nobody would expect there not to be a knock-on effect of having to pay for what we've all been going through. And whilst the proposed changes to the fire service at the moment might not be about money, in a year's time that may well be the case, mightn't it?
Well, the PM has made clear that the route out of this, he said, is not through increasing taxes and slashing public spending. So, we are in a different position to where we were 10 years ago. Global interest rates are pretty low, and so we can borrow a lot of this money that we're spending at the moment, and the cost of that is relatively low. So we've got different options now compared to the recession and austerity of 10 years ago. So the PM is very focused that he does not want to go down the route of tax increases and cutting public spending. None of us have a crystal ball over how this is going to work out, and it's affecting every country in the world. But we recognise that that's not the route that we want to take to get us out of this situation in a financial way, because we've just got to get the economy going. And if you reduce people's ability to spend money, that has a knock-on effect on the economy as well.
That's an interesting theory that has been around for a long time. It'd be interesting to see what actually happens there with that. Finally, if I may, next week is Care for the Carers. It's Carers Week. Now, the one thing that, again, COVID-19 and this whole experience has sort of shown up is how distanced both the care industry and the health service are. And I know there have been plans and efforts to try and put the two things together. Are we anywhere nearer to actually achieving that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, the frustrating thing about the coronavirus is that the government had announced just before the plans to bring health and social care together, and a new social care system would be going to be announced later this year. And obviously the coronavirus now, has taken up a lot of the time. And so, that will be announced later this year, but it has delayed it slightly. But absolutely, that's the problem. We've been able to coordinate the NHS in terms of testing, in terms of PPE, in terms of extra ITU capacity with the Nightingale hospitals, but there is no overall national coordination of social care. So you've got local councils providing social care, private companies, individuals buy in their own social care. So there's no national coordination, and that's why it's been so difficult to support the care sector, because it isn't just one provider coordinated from a central point. And so there's huge lessons to have learned from the COVID situation, but it is a real lesson that we need a national care service as well as a national health service, so that going forward we're not in this situation again. But that's for some people, there's going to be some difficult decisions made. I'm sure there's some private providers who won't necessarily feel comfortable with being part of a national care system, so we're going to have some tough discussions about this in the next few months ahead, but the government is really keen that we don't kick this into the long grass. We absolutely need to grasp this nettle and deal with that issue once and for all.
Now, I'm going to say it really is a difficult thing, and the other thing is splitting the lines of what the health service see as something they deal with. Alzheimer's being one of those, being probably the main problem at the moment, that the health service really doesn't actually deal with that. It's literally fairly swiftly passed to the care sector to say, well, we can't do anything, you deal with it. Are we going to see an end to that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that really is, a symptom of this current system we've got. And the NHS, to be fair to them, they, I've often, I argue cases for constituents all the time around continuing care, which is an argument that the health service pay for it rather than social care pay for care. And so I put challenges in on behalf of constituents all the time. But they do that for financial reasons because, they don't want to have to pick up the price tab. And so they label something as social care rather than health care. And with my nurse's hat on, that's almost impossible to distinguish. If you're sitting with someone who's got dementia and you're holding their hand and you're, helping them to eat, in my mind, that's healthcare. But in the kind of social care, healthcare funding land, that would be deemed as social care. And so it's a different funding stream, different group of providers who provide it. And we need to end that. And I think if we had a national social care system, you would see an end to that and more collaborative health and social care for patients. So it's not just about funding. It would be a better experience for those who need the care and for their relatives and friends who are often left battling on their behalf to try and get, one group, either social care or healthcare to take responsibility for them. So hopefully it's not just about money, it's about a better experience as well.
30 seconds on this one because we're running out of time. Very quickly, the one thing this whole coronavirus thing has exposed is that the number of low-paid people who are doing essential work, can they expect to see their money increase, do you think? 30 seconds.
I think we're going to have definitely conversations about that because that's the part of the problem is people aren't paid right. Although we brought in the living wage, I personally feel that they should be valued a lot more, and financially is one of the ways of doing that.
Maria, it's been good to catch up with you. There's a whole host of stuff in there, lots and lots of things going on locally. I see you're back at the House of Commons voting, not voting or whatever. We'll catch up on that one, I think, fairly soon. But for now, Maria Caulfield, thank you for talking to us this morning.
All right.
Stay
safe, everyone.